Okay, so what I wanted to do is I wanted to kind of like give a video on some of these histogram problems, particularly this one here with these grocery items. And the reason why I want to do that is because I think there's sometimes a misreading of this particular histogram. People have a problem like kind of understanding what it's trying to ask. And I think that's a little bit of a reading issue. And then also just to make sure that what we understand is this idea of at most and at least, because sometimes there are some issues there with that too. And then we can kind of talk a little bit about doing work with histograms. Okay, so this is a histogram, and so what this is we've got a set of classes, and these classes, what do they represent? So let's read. What does it represent? During one shift, the express lane clerk recorded how many times customer violated the 10 items or less rule for this lane. Okay, so what do we mean by violated? Well, violated means that they had more than 10 items. That's the idea, right? Okay, you go to the grocery store, there's 10 items or less. There's somebody standing there and they've got like 25 items, and you're like, man, that's more than 10 items. So what this grocery clerk has done is they've gone in and they've recorded how many items, right? In particular, he recorded how many items over the limit each violator placed on the conveyor belt. So my histogram is going to be a picture of how many items they are over the 10. What that means, and this is a key thing, not for this question so much, but for other questions, is how many items does that mean that they're on the belt? Well, more than 10. So in this case, they'll either be 11 or 12 or 13 or 14, but the histogram's going to display it as 1 item over, 2 item over, 3 item over, 4 item over, okay? And so what does that mean? That means that what we're looking at here is like this class right here that I'm kind of circling right now, that's going to be the class where there's 4 items over or 14 items. The person has 14 items there, and so they get counted here, okay? And so then over here is the 7 or more items. That means that they have 17 or 18 or more items on the conveyor belt. So consequently, we want to make sure that we understand what this is actually showing us. The next part is to look at this and understand these class boundaries right here. So the 0.5, the 1.5, the 2.5, they're class boundaries. And what they represent is they represent values that are going to be like the limits at which the values are going to be inside of these on this histogram. So the beginning part, this first one here, the one that's on the far left-hand side, like this 0.5 right here, that actually is going to be included in this bar. So this bar is going to go from 0.5, and it's going to go from 0.5 to actually 1.5, but not quite 1.5, and that's why we're going to use the parentheses. Okay, so just to kind of give you an idea that 1.5 is not going to be included inside of this first bar. It's going to be included in the next bar. Okay, so the next bar is going to be 1.5, comma, and notice 1.5 will be included to 2.5, but 2.5 won't be included. Now here's the thing about this picture. The fact is that there's no such thing as like 2.5 items. It doesn't exist. So consequently, what we want to get is that when we're looking here at these class boundaries, they kind of just tell us that how many items does this person have? They're 1 item over. That's the only thing that's in that bar, right? Because that's the only whole number between 0.5 and 1.5. What about the next one? Well, that's going to go from 1.5 to 2.5, and so consequently, it's the 2 group. Those are 2 items over, or people who have 12 items. Then over here, this is going to be the one with the 3 items, okay? Right? Because it's going to be the only whole number between 2.5 and 3.5, so consequently, that's going to be the only one that shows up, right? And so on and so on and so forth, and that's actually how we're going to read all of these. So what we have is we have a group that has 1 item over, we have a group that has 2 items over, 3 items over, 4 items over, 5 items over, 6 items over, and 7 items over, okay? 7 or more, actually. 7 or more items. And so what we're looking to do now, we kind of understand what this picture is telling us. Different histograms are going to be slightly different, but they're always going to have that same basic idea. And this is important. It's been written inside of, written as well, is that the far left-hand value is included, right, okay, in the next one over. So like if we did have 1.5, it would be included in the second bar, okay? 2.5 would be included in the third bar. So it's kind of that idea that next one, it's not quite included, it's just, right, okay, we're going to go up to that line but not cross it, okay? All right, so now what I want to do is I now want to look at this and I go, okay, so now I understand what the histogram is telling me. What I want to do now is I want to say, okay, well, what is the frequency of times the limit was exceeded by at most 2 items. So there's some reading that goes on here. And this idea, there's a couple of things that are going on here. The first one is frequency. So we've now seen frequency quite a lot. And so frequency means how many people are in each category or each group, right? So if I look here, the frequency of people who had 1 item over, okay, is 7, right? Because it's right between 6 and 8, so it's going to be 7. So there were 7 people who had 1 item over. The number that had, say, for example, 6 items over, this grouping right here, that's going to be 8. There are 8 people who have 6 items over. And so that's how you're going to read it, right? And that's what a frequency is. How many elements, right, or how many individuals are in each class? That's the frequency, okay? The frequency is how many individuals are in each class. Okay? Now, next up, what we want to do is we want to get, what does it mean to be exceeded by at most 2 items? This is a key point. This is kind of something a little tricky, and I think I wasn't going to do it here. I was going to do it in a little later section, but it's good for us to even think about. So the first thing is, what does it mean to be at most? Okay? What it means to be at most is that we don't go over that number. Okay? We do not go over, but we do include that number. So in this case, when we say exceeded by at most 2 items, right, that means we are only looking for those that exceeded by 1 or 2 items. So the other way to state this, okay, we say at most often is less than or equal to 2. And so what I want you to do is kind of think about it, because that actually is something that we do use that phrase, at most. There's at most 4 people in there. What does that mean? There's no more than 4. Up to 4, but no more than 4. And that's what we mean by at most. Next question, right? The next phrase that we might see is at least. Okay? And what at least means is we do not go under, okay? But we do include that number. So, like, for example, if we said something like at least 4 people exceed, at least 4 items, or the individual exceeded 10 by at least 4 items, okay? This is telling us more than or equal to, actually I should say it's better, it's greater than or equal to. Greater than or equal to 4. Now, I think one of the things that people kind of get mixed up on a little bit is they see at most and they think it's going to be the greater than or equal to. That's not true, right? You have to think about what it means to be at most. That means that we're not going to go above it. And what does it mean to be at least? That means we're not going to go below it. So hence, it gives us the less than or equal to in the case of the at most, and the at least, we're going to get the greater than or equal to. Okay? So when I look at this, what is the frequency of times the limit was exceeded by at most 2 items? Okay? Well, that means at most, we're going to go up to 2, but not below it. So this is the 1 grouping, that first one. And the second one is the 2 grouping. So there's 7 in the 1, right? People who exceeded by 1 item, that's 7, plus the 8 that are in the grouping that exceeded it by 2. And so consequently, what it tells us is that 15 people, right, exceeded 10 by at most 2 items. So that actually kind of gives us a lot of stuff. One, we looked at, we read the histogram, okay? We kind of had to understand what the histogram was telling us, right? We had to understand what it means to be a class boundary and which values are actually in the class boundary. So remember that this value, like 1.5, is over here in the second bar, right? It's not in the first bar. 2.5 is in the third bar, not in the second, okay? So whenever we have that far left-hand boundary, it's going to be in the next one over, okay? And we also need to understand what does it mean to be at most and at least, right? Because these are two phrases that are going to come up a lot in statistics, and so that should be really kind of like helpful. You should think about those too. All right, so this concludes my video.